I'm your host, Tim Wood. Welcome to The Natural You, where we'll be interviewing guests from different backgrounds and all walks of life to discuss our relationship with nature and how we can better connect to the natural world, both in us and around us. Nature already has all the answers we need to be healthier and happier in all aspects of our lives. Listen up to hear how to access more of The Natural You. Amy Burke is originally from California and is a seasoned, internationally experienced chiropractor and educator. She graduated magna cum laude from the University of California, Berkeley, and is a Doctor of Chiropractic degree from Life Chiropractic West. She continues to inspire practitioners with the concepts of biotensegrity and sacred geometry in an approach called biogeometric integration, also known as BGI. She is the lead liaison for BGI Europe seminars and teaches in Europe and the United States. Amy currently lives in Italy and has practices in Venice and on the island of Pantelleria, where she serves humans of all ages, from princes to farmers, VIPs to newborn babies, all with exceptional chiropractic care in her unique, centered and down-to-earth approach. Hi, Amy. Thank you for joining us. This is Amy Burke, and she's here today to chat with us about, I'm hoping we're going to chat about something called sacred geometry and how she integrates that with her work. So, Amy, welcome.
Thank you, Tim. It's delightful to be here and to see you outside of our normal context. So it's really special. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, I've heard you talk from the stage, and we've chatted briefly and exchanged emails, but I think this is the first kind of in-depth chat we're going to have. So I'm really excited to learn more about what you have to say. Can you tell us a little bit more about sacred geometry? What is it, and where do we see it, and how does it relate to us in everyday life?
Absolutely. So it kind of depends on where we're looking in terms of where we're going to see it. And I think that's true for most things in life. But let's start with what is it? So sacred geometry is generally appreciated to be a construct of looking at the way of the creation of the world, acknowledging that there is a divine fingerprint in everything, so that there is a structure that will bring us back to our divinity and our understanding of our own sacred nature. And for me, that means that when I'm out in nature, it's really easy to find kind of like little Post-it notes from divine spirit saying, hey, here I am, look at me. And I am as you are. We are all part of this greater picture of this unfoldment of the divine manifestation of our sacred nature. And when it comes to answering that question, what is sacred geometry?
Yeah.
It's such a big question. And so for me, the easiest way, and I've done a fair amount of reading because I do teach a bit about sacred geometry. I would love to feel more articulate and more in depth. However, the concept is such a huge weighted blanket that even when I read people who their life's work is devoted to writing or talking about sacred geometry, It just seems that the easiest way to articulate and deliver the concept is just in this understanding that there is an order and a patterning and a structure to everything, that it is consistent and it is repetitive, and that it is observable in all types of natural phenomena, whether it's in our own DNA or the construction of the cosmos. So as there's a common phrase, as above, so below, where we see things on a huge scale as well as we see them on a microscopic or visible to the human eye scale.
So as we expand, so as we look outward as far as we can, we see it. And as we look inward as far as we can, down to the molecular and anatomic level, we still see that.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, brilliant. So could you give me some recent examples that where you've just seen it in like the last day or two?
Sure. So I was just in Paris, and we were walking by in this courtyard, and there was a camellia plant, and camellia blossoms are an incredible manifestation of the phi spiral. And so if you imagine when you see that just delicate spiral going through plants, we see it in the Romanesco broccoli spirals. We see it in seashells. We see it in succulent plants, the plants that have the spirals. We see it in, like if we are looking at a child's science book about DNA and showing the spiral of our DNA. If we look at architecture, it is considered that the most beautiful architecture actually follows the ratio of the divine ratio, which is based on the number phi, which is 3.68 yada, yada, yada into infinity, just like pi is 3.14 into infinity. And basically that ratio is considered to be one that is a perfect proportion. So if we take Notre Dame, the facade of Notre Dame, that is the structure upon which it is built. If we take a beautiful human being who we look at and just innately know that person is in proportion, the proportion of the nose to the mouth, of the eyes to the lips, of the fingers from the little fingers to the distal phalanges to the medial phalanges, like all of these proportions in humans, in architecture, in horses, in dogs, in frogs, in fish, this spiral ratio continues to show itself. And so one can go, oh my God, that's such an amazing coincidence. Or we can step back and say, okay, clearly there is an organizing force here. And this structure, this ratio has to be one that is superior, not only in its artistic manifestation or the beauty of how it looks, but also in its structural integrity. And so I think that we see it in nature so frequently, and the way that leaves grow on trees. There's certain trees that have 2s. There's certain trees that have 3s. There's certain trees that have 5s in terms of their leaf patterning. Those numbers are all part of the Fibonacci series. And that has to do with the way they place themselves on the branch in order to get the most amount of light exposure. And so each type of tree will have a different way that the leaves will be constructed and will unfurl on the branch. And so I get so excited about this because like when I'm walking down the street or when I'm walking down the beach, it's like, oh, look, oh, look, oh, look. And for me, it reminds me of how magical this experience that we get to live as human beings is. And when we're out in nature, to take the time to observe these beautiful patterns. And I think one of your questions was, aren't they just pretty patterns?
Yeah.
And they may be just pretty patterns, but they are such a consistency in the way they appear in nature that I feel like anything that happens once is a coincidence. Anything that happens every time I walk outside the door, it's not a coincidence anymore. It's just how it is. And sacred geometry shows itself to me just everywhere in nature. And I take it upon myself to take the time to notice it and celebrate it, because I truly feel like it is my opportunity to notice the beauty around me and to appreciate then, as somebody who works with one of nature's most incredible machines, which is the human body, to then bring that into my work and observe how is nature speaking to me through this person in these patterns.
Wow.
And that's for me when it gets really fun, although I am pretty fun to go on a walk with.
Brilliant. So when you look in and you're observing and you're celebrating, your human experience and your connection to the divine, in essence. So you're just looking for those little cues, and in these perfect proportions, you feel those perfect proportions can only be divine, and that's a spiritual experience for you.
It is a way of acknowledging the incredible design that surrounds us. And whether we want to be calling it the divine or the intelligence or universal consciousness in physical manifest form, to me, the name is truly irrelevant. But that it exists and that it to me is like saying, check me out. Look how beautiful I am. And then I turn around and I'm like, wow, and you too, and you too. And it's everywhere. And I think it was Einstein. Well, it was Hallmark Einstein, whether he actually said it or not, I cannot say. But who said, you have two choices. You can either live your life as though nothing is a miracle or as though everything is a miracle. And so when I see these patterns around me, just truly in my daily life, I don't have to look very hard. I'm like, wow, we are so interconnected with this magnificent construction that is a universal intelligence or an innate intelligence or a universal consciousness that, to me, it's just a reminder of, in some ways, of the beauty of the design, and in some ways, my position within that, and my small part of acknowledging the connection and the beauty and the expression of that consistent intelligence.
Brilliant. And I also think if you were just purely rational being and, perhaps a mathematician without just everything's kind of factual and down to some kind of numbers, you would, the sequences and the ratios would be just so beautiful, even in their perfection I think that could be just looking at nature, even without any kind of attributing any kind of divine or spiritual element, could just be just so kind of humbling in terms of how that's so evident and so everywhere through nature. And like you say, in architecture too, and how we've borrowed from that.
Yes, it makes sense that we've taken the best parts of nature and tried to recreate them in our own human methods and modes. When you talk about the mathematicians, it reminds me when I first started studying with Sue Brown, who was my mentor and from whom I learned the chiropractic work that I do. She introduced me to the thoughts of so many of our current brilliant scientists. So I don't think it's just a construction of the TV show, The Big Bang Theory, that in our social consciousness, our group consciousness, we give particular credence to those who are like doing quantum physics. We understand that they are kind of ahead of the game in terms of understanding how things work. And there were so many people in the field of quantum physics who were talking about the patterning and this universal consciousness and this presence that was clearly a design that was non-coincidental. And it brought this awareness of, there's been for a long time a misunderstanding that to be scientific is one thing and to be spiritual is another, and that they don't cross whatsoever. And what she was bringing into my awareness, which made perfect sense, is the people who are really out there dabbling in how does the cosmos work? How does the universe work? How does the body work? That we can't really get very far into those studies without appreciating this idea of there being an organizing consciousness that is outside of our human ability to understand or conceive.
That's really, I think, the quantum physics has given us a whole new language to understand these phenomena, which beforehand we only could access through kind of, I'm going to say, more spiritual terms.
Yeah.
And now when you talk about, a non-coincidental design, I haven't heard that before. That's really, really cool, because it can't just be coincidence. We were told that, if it's the Big Bang, or now they say that didn't happen, there was something before that. But even that was just something out of nothing, a total coincidence. And certainly evolution was purported as, just coincidental things, some things just happening and the next thing. if it isn't coincidental, then, as you say, there's some kind of organizational forces at least at play. And if we expand that and look even deeper, as you say, some kind of organizational consciousness, which is really interesting when you look at the physics and the quantum physics. And it's in our material world, it's quite easy just to grasp at those. And I as a scientist in my earlier life, it was all about the numbers and crunching those numbers. And I only have not a particularly high level of mathematical knowledge. So I would look at the statistics and I would go, okay, right, this is the formula we use to get to this answer. And we take our numbers and we put them into this machine, and we turn the statistical handle, and it gives us these results. And it was beautiful because it was a beautiful machine. But I didn't really understand the mechanisms of the machine because I didn't have the math, but I just trusted it. And so many of us, I think, are on that kind of level. Is like, we just trust the science. The science is the tool, and we just have to trust the outcome, not necessarily understanding. I mean, I've shown students, and I put up a formula. And they go, oh, no, we're scientists. We trust the science. And I put up a formula. I say, can someone tell me what this is? And they don't know. And I say, well, you're totally just trusting someone else who's put together this formula and just in a state of trust and belief, saying this is going to give us some form of truth. So it's interesting how science and different ways of looking at science and statistics and now, the whole quantum model and how that's really expanding our understanding. And quite difficult to grasp because they're not something we can put into a little machine and grind,
Well, this is the thing. I feel like we're at such an interesting precipice right now where there's a lot of parts of science that are interesting into moving towards that expansive understanding of what do numbers mean, or what does the data actually mean. But when it comes to the human system, we are so complex. We are so dynamic, and we are so responsive to our environment and all the different pieces of it, that when we are doing something that is called a scientific experiment, in my humble estimation, it is still so tremendously incomplete because we are looking at one input and one output, but we're not looking at the whole picture of all of the other things that are changed and shifted and evolving due to that input, because we can't, because we still have this idea that medicine or bodies or science is a linear approach. And it isn't. When we are looking at nature, when we are looking at biology, when we are looking at our environment, there are very few linear processes in it. And science loves linearity because it's the only way to package things in small enough bits and pieces for us to wrap our brains around. And we know about our brains. They're very smart, but they only use a little tiny piece. And so we're limiting our understanding. So if we take this drug and we get this result, we think that that's a linear process. But in the middle, there are so many bits and pieces that are changing and shifting and evolving and reacting and turning off and turning on, that to me, that's where the science is in the middle, saying, and what about all of these other millions of things that are happening? What about those? But we don't look at those because it's too much. And so I feel like the concept of science and the scientific model and our desire to push the envelope to truly understand is at a precipice. And it's pretty interesting to see how things are shifting, and people who have never thought of themselves as scientifically oriented or even scientifically interested are suddenly being engaged in this debate, because over the last couple of years we've had so much science being sold as a linear process. And now it's like we're looking at the result in a big picture with two steps back going, okay, well, that didn't go as planned. And instead of saying, okay, but this is science, this is what we do, is we experiment. And this was a really big experiment and we missed it. We were off. Where people are doubling down and putting their heels down in the ground based on science. And it's, to me, we're just at a really critical point where people are going, wait, that actually doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
And so I'm so curious to see where we're going to go. And since I've been teaching, I've been saying our understanding of medicine is basically based on Newtonian physics. And until we bring our understanding that there is a huge energetic component into a medical model, we're still going to get mediocre results. But once we bring our understanding into a quantum physics and appreciation that we are as much energy as we are matter, then things are going to start to change. And this has gone off.
Yeah, it's I see it very much as the limitations of the reductionist model. It's really we're stuck in that paradigm of trying to reduce the variables.
Yeah.
When and looking at that one isolating factor and reducing the variables, but we are the variables.
Exactly.
And as you said, everything interconnects. And so when we take a complex system and we try to reduce all the variables and limit those we call them confounding factors, but they are the factors. And I think that's a real challenge in these complex systems like the human body. And we really need to find a new way of exploring and a new way of examining those things and testing them. In holism says we're greater than the sum of our parts, but reductionism can only produce a part, and so it can never ever create a holistic view, even when you take all of those pieces. And there's a real challenge in I think let's call it bioscience to look at this complexity. I mean, perhaps in ecosystems we try and do it, and even then we realize it's so complex. That we're really struggling to gather these bits of data and bits of information and then try and formulate a whole from that. So it's almost like we need to have a new way of looking at things. And that's where I guess people working in natural health are using different ways of knowing, like intuition.
Yes.
And you tapped in earlier into energies. I mean, we talk about it. We don't fully understand it. I could put my hands on someone and I can know something, and I don't know how I know it, but I know it. And some of it might be from pattern recognition. So I've experienced it before, and so I recognize those patterns. Just like you see those beautiful patterns in nature, we will pick up distorted patterns or diseased patterns, and we'll know that's not the pattern I recognize, and so that's a pattern recognition. But sometimes I feel there's even a deeper knowing where I don't, well, certainly maybe an intuitive level, or not even at a tacit level of knowing that I know, but I don't know. But something perhaps even deeper than that is like, okay, here I'm tapping into something different. So they're the patterns, and then the distortions of the patterns. And I'd like to know, how do you bring those kind of concepts, the patterns and distortions to patterns, and then probably it's a different question, but the energetic side of things too in your work. If you could just tell us a little bit about your work and the BGI and how that all kind of puts together.
Okay, fantastic. Please feel free to re-guide me if I go too far off road. So one of the things that really attracted me to this type or this chiropractic approach was the understanding that we are a completely interconnected system as humans, and that we are basically a biotensegrity structure, which means that everything is connected from top to bottom. And as a chiropractor,
can you just tell us what biotensegrity means?
Yes. So a tensegrity structure is something that is made up of rigid struts and then elastic bits and pieces. So in a body, that means our skeleton, so our bony bits are the rigid struts, and then all of the fascia and connective tissues are the elastic bits that hold us together. And if you So this isn't going to help for the people that can't see, but if you imagine like this type of structure, everything is connected.
What that's called the Huberman sphere. Is
The
that
Hilbert
right?
sphere, yes. And so when I put my hand on a body, if I press or put an input into any area of the body, in theory, if it's all connected, like a proper tensegrity structure, that input will be transmitted instantaneously and automatically throughout the entire system. Now, that's
The whole system.
yeah, so it would be not only through the connective tissue and the bony structures, but also through the whole cellular structure of the body. So when we talk about patterning and distortions in chiropractic, as I learned it in chiropractic college, a subluxation or a displacement or a distortion or a malpositioning of one vertebra in relation to the one above and below was taught as a segmental dysfunction or a segmental minor pathology. And when I met Sue, what was so attractive to me was understanding the patterning in our body and the pattern and the way we distort and subluxate in our system. It becomes a global distortion rather than a segmental distortion. And
So can I just ask? So any distortion affects the whole,
yes,
and not just at a neurological level of input, but as a physical, actual tension, pressure level.
yes,
Wonderful.
yeah. So what I love about that is my understanding that if we are connected from top to bottom and bottom to top, when I go in there, if I bring my awareness to the way that segment is creating a distortion throughout the whole person, then I truly feel as though my adjustment or my chiropractic input is going to be affecting the entire system. So as an aside to that, if there is a break in the system in BGI, biogeometric integration, that is what we call a disconnect. And it's like two little pieces of the tensegrity model are just, they're separated. And so as a chiropractor, and this may or may not be relevant to the majority of your listeners, and you can decide whether this is valuable, but when we go in there and we're feeling those areas that make us get real excited as chiropractors, where we're feeling that really high muscular facilitation and it's just super like juicy, most chiropractors want to go in there and give their osseous thrust at that area of highest muscular facilitation. And we wonder why that person leaves the office and comes back a week later or 2 weeks later or 3 months later or whatever it is. And we have the same pattern showing up and up again and again and again and again.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding of the system is that that is actually not a segmental dysfunction or a subluxation, but a disconnect. And until we connect those pieces that are disconnected, our input is only going to be locally administered because there's a break in the continuity of the system. The tensegrity structure has, for its own protection, been disconnected. And so when we reconnect all the bits and pieces before we go to do our adjustment, we are allowing for then our amazing chiropractic adjustment, no matter how that is delivered, whether it's a toggle or an activator or SOT blocks, that input then is instantaneously and holographically addressed through the entire system rather than to that segment. And for most chiropractors, that makes a lot of sense because we see somebody with recurring patterns, whether it's a right PI ilium or that incredibly tight band of tension across T6, T7, lots of times at the transition areas, lots of times between atlas and occiput. So that was a little bit technical for our chiropractic listeners, but I think it's really valuable to understand the importance of making sure people are fully connected from top to bottom before we deliver our beautiful chiropractic adjustment.
The connection. So obviously a lot of people understand the adjustment and the input at some kind of mechanical level. It sounds like BGI has a kind of preparation, get the area all ready to receive that in the best way.
Exactly.
What is just, I don't know, probably not, probably needs a whole weekend seminar, but just briefly, how does that look and feel in that kind of preparatory stuff?
Yeah. So it's once you get the hang of it, it's real fast. Mm-hmm. And we're basically looking for those really big dramatic changes in tone, which is a word that we use a lot in chiropractic. And where we go from either a solid, vital feeling of the tissue to where it just drops down into a very passive, kind of mushy or absent feeling, that would be a disconnect. Or if we go from kind of medium tone where we're feeling that nice muscular tone and presence, could be neural tone, it doesn't matter, just tone in general. And it goes into a very high tone. Anywhere we have a big dramatic shift, that's what we call a disconnect. And it can be as simple as asking the person to take a breath in that area. It can be as simple as using the arms as a long lever or the jaw or the legs to just try and create a little bit of space or distancing and having the person take a deep breath. And what I notice, it is often areas that have experienced some type of trauma, whether it's physical, emotional, chemical, and the body's just like, I am full right now. I can't deal with this. And so it's like it unplugs that area. And as chiropractors, we notice the difference. And so we go in and we're working with those very internal structures in the spine, but we're not necessarily able to affect the change that we're desiring, which is why we keep coming back and doing the same adjustment over and over again, because that area really isn't online. And so in the seminars that I teach, that's called establishing continuity. And it's a very quick and simple process for the person on the table. It's very relaxing. But we also have the person engage in the process. It's like, take a deep breath, bring your arms out, so that when they're sitting at their office desk for 12 hours a day with bad posture, they can start to realize like, oh, wow, I really need to wiggle and move around. And just watching me do this, you can see that I'm using my arms as a long lever. If I put a note on my phone to take a deep breath every 10 minutes, that sounds ridiculous. But most of us are literally doing the minimum possible to try and stay alive when we're breathing. Like, we're such bad breathers. And so having a little note, get up and drink enough water so that you actually have to get up and go pee every 45 minutes. And just those simple things help the body to be able to be a single connected unit rather than a bunch of disconnected pieces. And the disconnection, I believe, is just the body trying to protect itself, where it's just like, I can't deal with more input in this area right now, no matter how well intentioned it is.
So it's that protective strategy is just sort of saying, okay, right, I'm going to take you sort of a little bit out of that area out of the equation for a bit, or what I sometimes call in the computing analogy is like, it's running in safe mode. You can access it, but not at high level function.
Yes. Perfect analogy. I'm going to steal it.
Go for it. Well, that's really interesting. I'm fascinated by that. And on average, obviously, when you get skilled at it, how long would like an average session take? Because in chiropractic, there's so many different techniques. Some are very quick, some take a long time. So just to give some of the people who might be interested in receiving this or learning about it, how long that might take on an average session?
It completely depends on the chiropractor. And what I love about BGI, it's kind of like what we see in nature. It's not a technique. there is not one way to apply the concepts. So it's like we take an understanding of the way the body distorts, the way the body holds patterns, the way the body holds energy, the way we as the chiropractor can interact with all of that in a productive and easy way for the person. And each person can apply those basic tenets to whatever chiropractic approach or technique that they already love, that they already employ.
Well, that's great.
So for some people, it is a 30-second add-on to what they already do. And I've had some chiropractors come to seminars where after we go through the part about establishing continuity, which obviously when you're learning it in a seminar, we're going through step by step by step, and it takes a while. And I've had people come up to me and say, I cannot do this in practice. I will lose, I'll lose half my day. And I go, okay, try it. Take 5 people out of your day, because if we take the time to establish continuity, when you go to do your adjustment, whatever that looks like, the body goes, that is so much easier for me to take that piece of information and work with that, rather than you putting a thrust into either an energetic void or an energetic overdrive, which is the 2 areas that we as chiropractors are most attracted to, because we're looking at the areas that are different from everything else. And I've had those same people come back to me at other seminars, and they go, I thought that it didn't make sense. And then I did do it on a few people, and the adjustments that I was giving were so much easier for me to do, easier on my body, but also easier on their body. And so I'm now establishing continuity on everyone. So there are people who see people for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. There's people who see people for 40 minutes. It just depends on how they want to do it. And I think it's really a reflection of the chiropractor and how they want to serve the people that are coming to their practice. So
it's nice.
That is a very vague answer.
I think it's really nice that it can be integrated and personalized, taking those concepts and seeing how that works for you. Different animals in different environments express differently, and we start to see those express. So that's fascinating, and I really think it's helpful for us, because if you've been in practice for a long time, to go and learn a whole new approach is quite a big change, and we don't like change that much. So to be able to bring something in and maybe layer it in, and then do another seminar and layer a bit more in, it's probably much easier for people who've been in practice for a while rather than setting out. I mean, it sounds like you started using these concepts when you graduated back in, I think it was 1999. You were exposed to these and have really been employing these all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, these are relatively, I've heard about tensegrity, and I've done some kind of more energy and tonal type stuff, but I've never had this opportunity to do this or followed that. So it's be nice to see how I could integrate it.
Absolutely. And integration, that's such a big part of what we do, is integrating that awareness of the biology and the geometry. So as we talked about in nature, our body exhibits patterning. And one of the things that was also super attractive to me about this work is that it came out of clinical experience. So it was truly a process of writing down what people's systems were expressing or what they were showing. And it was like 2 people had a clipboard and were following Sue around the office saying, okay, now what are you doing? Now what are you doing? Now what are you doing? Because she said, I would love to teach what I'm doing, but I don't have the structure for it. It feels like I'm just following my intuition, listening to what's being expressed on the table. And what turned out.
So they kind of encodified it for her. So she was following an intuitive process.
Exactly.
And just tapping into that. And then they codified it so that you could kind of structure it.
Yeah. And so in the very beginning, I don't think she trusted that there was necessarily going to be a big order to it. And so after it became clear that not only was there an order to it, but there was a geometric consistency in the way people's systems were showing up and patterning, that she was like, wow, this is something that I can teach, because there is a logic to it. There is a structure to it. There's a foundation to it. And when she started mapping out what then became the geometry, the biogeometric part of it, what was truly shocking to her, but maybe most to her, because I just think she didn't expect it whatsoever, is that the way that the geometry shows up in the body matched the way, if we were to draw a map of the Kabbalah and place it on the body, it looks almost exactly the same as the geometry. Mm-hmm. And that was utterly shocking and slightly alarming to Sue. Wow. Because she was like, I don't want people to think that I am imposing, like, wouldn't it be great if we could place this sacred geometry onto the body? And so she was very uncomfortable with that for a while. But the reality is when we mapped it out, and I say we very liberally, I was just learning, there were other people that were doing this, when it was being mapped out by Rick Potts and Steve McLean with Sue Brown, that the geometry, the structure was very clear. It was very consistent, and it was very logical. And then when that was placed next to an image of the Kabbalah, it's undeniably connected. And so then there was like this moment of, oh, now what? Like, this was not the plan whatsoever. And because somebody reminded Sue of the founder of chiropractic, Dee Dee Palmer, had said, the sole purpose of chiropractic is to reunite man the physical with man the spiritual. And so she kind of went, well, then that makes sense, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And for me, when I am teaching, to come back to this concept of the technique, it is so important for me that people understand that the sacred geometry was not laid onto the body because Sue Brown thought it would be really cool to have a chiropractic approach that was based in sacred geometry. What Sue Brown did was follow the way people's bodies were distorting and the way they were storing patterns in their system, and that matches sacred geometry. And if we think about the concept of innate intelligence and universal intelligence, that makes perfect sense, that there is a consistent patterning, and that there is, when people are doing any type of personal development or consciousness work where they are trying to expand and deepen their awareness of their connection to this bigger thing, whatever it is, whether we want to call it God or spirit or consciousness, that there is a consistent messaging, whether it's visual through a Sri Yantra, or visual through a Kabbalah, or storytelling through the Kabbalah, or storytelling for two people saying, this is the story of my life, and this is how I got to where I am. And isn't it amazing when we think about all the things that that happened to me to get here? And when we as a chiropractor put our hands on somebody's body and we're like, wow, that's a lot of story in that system. How can we help you release and integrate the stuff that you're holding on to that you don't need anymore?
Very, very powerful. And for a lot of people, who are drawn to sort of more spiritual side of things, that's super exciting. And for others who are very physically orientated, that's kind of like really woo, and it gets a bit tricky. But what I like about this is that you could approach it from any of those levels. I mean, you can look into the symbols and the sacred geometry associated with many religious traditions have their designs and images that you can go and look up on the internet of. Most have these kind of sacred representations and patterns, and so you can go there if you want, or you can just say, hey, these are very cool designs, and this is a perfect design for the body, and I'm going to look towards that. So if you're very posturally orientated and take a very structural view on the sagittal curve in the neck and the low back, then you could approach it purely from that and pull this in beautifully. And if you're more into the kind of more woo side of things, then you can really integrate that beautifully as well. So it sounds like a really useful mix for whatever type of practitioner or person you are.
It's funny that you mentioned the curves, because it's what you say is absolutely true. And when I talk to people who are really focused on the postural or the physical manifestation of what they're doing in practice, I'll just give an example. The other day, I had somebody come in for the first time, and they were telling me about surgery that they had at L5. And then they said, and now I have a hernia in my cervicals. And I said, C5 or C6? Now, for most chiropractors, you'll understand that is, we know that, right? That is, and not only that, those are the most common areas of herniation. But when we look at the geometry, the map that we're given through the innate intelligence that Sue mapped out, it matches up. We have this series of triangles that are expressing through the body. One of them, for example, is its sacrum, which as a chiropractor or as a human being, if you know what your sacrum looks like, it is a triangle. And the base of sacrum, the big part, or the apex of sacrum, those match up with different areas of the body consistently throughout the whole system. So how many people have come into your practice with L5 stuff and they also have herniations at C6 or C7? I'm sorry, earlier I said C5, C6 or C7. That is the manifestation of the geometry, or the manifestation of the geometry matches what actually happens physiologically and physically in practice. How many people do we know that come in with hip pain, and then as you're working on them, they tell you that they have shoulder and jaw stuff going on, sometimes on the opposite side, sometimes on the same side. So the geometry beautifully matches what we find in practice, which is perfect because it came out of practice that the geometry unfolded.
Amy, this is fascinating, and I'm just looking at the time, and we've pretty much we run out, and we've only just got started. So I know I'm going to have to explore this a bit more, and I'm sure other people who chiropractors, other practitioners are listening are going to be fascinated at different levels, and people who potential clients or just want to experience this, I think that'll make a lot of sense too. So I'm sorry, I'm disappointed to have to cut this short. I'm enjoying it so much, but I'm sure we'll have to get you on again, and then we can explore some other areas, because you obviously have a vast knowledge of the theoretical aspects, but also how that comes into practice. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to chatting you again some more.
Thank you, Tim. It was really delightful to sit here with you and have this chat.
Thank you so much. Cheers, Amy.
Cool.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to The Natural You. I hope you got something useful out of this episode. If you think someone might benefit from hearing this, please share it with them. Lastly, I'd love it if you hit the subscribe button and rate and review this podcast. See you next week.